So today I'm going to tell you why you don't understand Devil's Work by Joyner Lucas. And honestly, this video is aimed at those who think the message of the track is about trading lives, almost like Pokemon cards. That's one of the critiques that I've heard. I want to show you why that's a very shallow take and a huge misunderstanding of what Joyner Lucas was actually trying to communicate here. So I honestly believe that by the time it's all said and done, I'll have one of the most unique hip-hop review channels on the internet. So go ahead and subscribe and click notifications if you want to be a part of this journey, and go ahead and like the video if you believe you're going to learn something today. So this will probably be my most theology dense video so far. It is necessary though to understand the track, so I got to break it down for you. Devil's Work directly engages with theology and philosophy in a way that not a lot of tracks can accomplish. So quick, I want you to name a track in the comments that you believe engages in theology or in a discussion about God well. And maybe I might review that track in the future, but go ahead and leave it there. Now, in particular, Devil's Work explores four major theological concepts, and I'm going to break them down for you, but very quickly so that we can get right into the theology. But it explores the problem of evil, sin nature, death, and salvation. And so you're probably wondering, what do those mean? And if you've been in church, you probably have some understanding of that. And if you've been in theology school, you definitely have an understanding of this. I'm going to give you a quick definition right now of each one. So first, the problem of evil explores the philosophical question of how can evil exist when there is an omni-everything, as I like to call it, omniscient, omnipotent, omnibenevolent, which means all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good God. So this goes back to the Greek philosopher Epicurus, and it was made popular by the Scottish philosopher David Hume. So you can easily see why this concept will show up in this song, because it's questioning why those bad things happen to good people, that old adage. Now, this philosophical question is faulty and produces bad arguments about the existence of God because it fails logically. It's because the premises that people give don't necessitate the conclusions that they come up with about their understanding of God. And I can get into that a little bit more as we go into the track. The second concept, sin nature, can be explained through realizing what happened in the origin story of Genesis in the Bible. When Satan, hint at Devil's Work, this is very important here for the concept of this track. When Satan tempted Eve to disobey the command of God, it created a spiritual divide between God and man. So man's sin separated them from God, and they were no longer able to be in relationship with him. This divide was exacerbated by the permanent desire to do evil left on humanity's heart. That is sin nature. For this reason, no man is inherently good. That's what theologians call sin nature. And so the third thing I'm going to get into then is death. And so a holy God abhors evil. So death would then be the consequence of sin, which produces a lot of that evil. So therefore, every human must die. It's not something that can be avoided, which this track is grappling with that idea of like, well, I know that, but why are these good people dying? Is it because, as we just said, that divide between humans, that sin being on humanity's heart means that no one is good. But this type of shocking death we experience in the world, the ones that Joyner laments in this track, are the result of sin nature and evil. This is where the concept of salvation comes into play. So Genesis 3:15, like 3 chapters into Genesis, after right after Satan deceives Eve, is what theologians call the proto-evangelion. It's the first reference to the solution for sin, because in this verse it talks about how there will be a seed from the woman, like a descendant, a child, a person, who will crush the head of the serpent being symbolic of Satan, that seed being from the line of David, and of course referencing Jesus, who is the Son of God. Therefore, it's a direct allusion or reference to the fact and a foreshadowing that Jesus would die for sin and be rose from the dead. And that's a very important concept to understand for theology. This salvation is obtained through Christ, which defeats humanity's enslavement to sin. If you want to know a little bit more about that or like how that works, you can follow what's called the Roman road in the book of Romans, or the traditional John 3:16. Now that I finally got that concept squared away and you have it figured out, I'm going to actually jump into why this track is so powerful. Now, I didn't tell you all of that for no reason. If you understand that, you will be able to see just how much depth this track has. So let's jump into what Joyner did here. So Joyner performs this whole track from the perspective of a drunken lamenter of death. That creative decision alone is important because it is something real. People do this every day. We've all seen family or friends drink themselves under the table due to emotional pain, and then they project that anger on God. So I love that creative decision by Joyner here to then put himself in the position, and the whole framework, the thrust of this track is being told from the perspective of someone who's now drunk themselves into this drunken and in a very emotional state, and now they're trying to cope with the hard things of the world. The drunk, which is the title I'll be referring to, the person giving the lyrics for the rest of this track, opens the track with "Father, forgive me." He immediately acknowledges that he isn't in the right here. His anger toward God isn't justified here. The created attempting to dictate to the creator what should be considered just or right isn't a logical position to take, because the sense of morality came from the creator. With that said, the drunk is about to express feelings that are hard. What is interesting is that typically this expression to God has been frowned upon in certain church cultures, or at least before more recent years. This is not something that the church culture, though, learned from the Bible. This type of expression to God from the drunk is called a lamentation. A lamentation, or to lament, is to passionately express grief or sorrow. Think of the prophet Jeremiah from the Bible. He wrote a book called Lamentations, and that's in the Bible. Specifically, the drunk is lamenting over the death of those that he perceived were good, and therefore they should not have died. So this is on the basis that the drunk accuses God of cherry picking who lives and who dies. This sentiment that God is deciding who dies and who doesn't is the hinge on which the drunk's argument against God lands in this track. Unknowingly, most people are engaging in the exploration of the concept of determinism from God in the world's affairs. Now that's saying a lot, it's very dense, but this concept basically raises the question of, what does it mean for God to be in control? Does that mean that he is dictating every action? Does God having control mean that he is a micromanager? If you're more inclined to answer yes to those last couple of questions, you will, like the drunk here, most likely have issues with the problem of evil. The interesting thing is that I do not believe that this concept of determinism, or the extreme of it, is an accurate description of the universe. Human freedom and the impact of sin play a much larger part than this determinism would allow. With that said, the drunk and the average person would not have moved beyond their yes to those last two questions. Therefore, their anger with God is based on a misunderstanding of what he does. So that creates the full framework for how this drunk then is approaching his expressions to God, his criticism of his actions, why he believes these good people are leaving when they shouldn't, because it's based upon a misunderstanding of how God interacts with the world. And when you think about that in Devil's work, it really changes the way that you enjoy this track. At least for me, it adds so much more depth to it. Now, we see that in his line of, so he says this line, "Bring back every good one that you choose to take." The drunk obviously has his own criteria for who is good. How do we know who is good? Easy. It's based on God's criteria, not yours. The first mistake was assuming that you were the judge of who is good and who is not. The second mistake is assuming that God is determining who lives and dies in the micromanaging sense. The third mistake the drunk makes is that good actions versus evil actions determines if you die or not. And just honestly, it doesn't if you understand your theology. Remember, death comes anyway. The only standard of good is God's standard of accepting Christ and living a life of service to him. Even then, this life will end anyway. Evil is still happening around you and can happen to you. There was no promise of a comfortable, non-death life based on good actions. But the drunk's mindset and the average person who thinks their understanding of God is assumed and correct about the way he interacts, they wouldn't realize that. And so they would be more likely to make this mistake. So you can see his repeated going through his list of wrongs that God has done by people who were good or bad or whatever it may be, is all based upon this misunderstanding. And the more you go into it, the more you can, like, you feel like that sympathy for him. You also can understand because you can relate to it, but you can see the crack in the foundation there. We now see how the drunk could then think it was justifiable to express the sentiment of giving good ones back in place of the bad ones. Take Suge and give back Pac. Give back Michael Jackson and Whitney Houston, and take Dylan Ruth and Donald Trump instead. He is expressing real hard feelings to God about life and death, but based on a misunderstanding. If this isn't a raw and real human experience, I don't know what to tell you. We all go through this repeatedly in our lives. The drunk does all of this in a heightened emotional state exacerbated by alcohol. He then gains an awareness of this inebriated state that he is in. The drunk then begins to sober up and expresses regret for his words and gains a bit of clarity in theology. Check the words here. Putting the blame on you, that'll never work. I know this ain't your fault. It's the devil's work. In 2 lines, Joyner shines light on the invalid nature of the created, arguing against the creator and acknowledging sin nature. And I gotta say, that's just well done. To do that in 2 lines and it still rhymes and it's part of a story and a musical track, that's dope. The artistic hypocrisy of accusing God of cherry picking who stays and who goes is simply delicious. It highlights the flaw in the created being taking a stance of moral superiority over the being who created him. If no one else says it, I gotta say it. Well done, Joyner Lucas, for making one of the best tracks of 2019 and an excellent track that engages with theology. If you learned something, like this video, subscribe to it. If you want more content like this, please let me know in the comment section below and let me know what you thought about the track. Let me know if you disagree with me or if you have more that you want to add to this. I'd love to engage with you down there. Thanks for watching. I will see you next time.